Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder we're having a look at another user-created model, and this one is the P.1000 Ratte. Now, this is made by Beckett, who also made the TOG2 and many others that you've seen on this channel. And this one is obviously pretty special, being the P.1000. It's very much fictional, let's call it a paper design to be nice, but overall what you see in front of you is one of the largest behemoths you will ever see when it comes to World War II, dwarfing pretty much everything in the vehicle variety that you will see coming out of the conflict, apart from maybe a few huge ships. Anyway, let's get into the history of it, or lack thereof, and also, well, could it come to game? I know it's obviously a question which has got a pretty obvious answer, but we'll at the end of the video we'll have a talk about it. Anyway, so the Landkreuzer P.1000 Ratte, or R-A-T-T-E, which translates to rat, it was a proposed super heavy tank design of the German Krupp concern with origins in 1942. Hitler gave this mammoth undertaking his direct blessing as the program set about to create the most powerful tank ever devised for the modern battlefield. It was an ambitious undertaking, to say the least, and, if it was completed, would also have become the largest tank ever produced. Albert Speer, the German Minister of Armament and War Production of the Third Reich, saw the fruitlessness of such an endeavour and cancelled the P.1000 in early 1943. And therefore, because of this, the Rat never made it off the drawing boards. Can you imagine if this had actually gone through? A lot of people look at stuff like the Jagdtiger and the Maus, or even the E100, and say, what a waste of resources. You know, you could have put it into some other kind of design. And here we have the Landkreuzer, which is even more ridiculous on a scale of 10 times all of those different things. So overall, it's just insane when you think about it. But anyway, externally, the P1000, of course, would have dwarfed any other tank in production. The size would have been something to behold, with as many as 11 large road wheels affixed to either track's side. And the tracks themselves would have measured about nearly 4 feet in width, and the hull would have been largely conventional in design and construction by 1942 standards, with flat, skirted side armour and an angled front and rear hull armour facing. The armour at certain points would have reached between 150mm and 360mm in thickness. So even though it was so big, it still could have been penetrated by a few guns at that time. So if it ever does come to game, well, you know, at least you'll have some weak points to shoot at. The turret would have also sported ballistics, deflecting armour for maximum protection. The dimensions were pretty impressive with the P1000, sporting a height of 11 meters, a width of 14 meters, and a length of 35 meters. The overall operational weight was expected to reach 1,000 tons, or about 2 million pounds. Now, this is where the P1000 names comes from, obviously the expected weight of the machine. Can you imagine 1,000 tons rolling around the battlefield? Just remember, by the time of 1944-45, well after this design was even thought of, people realized, even I suppose before then, with the Maus and the E100 and even the Jagdtiger, that bridges were an issue. Rivers in Europe were an issue. All of these things were an issue. These tanks, the Maus, E100, the Jagdtiger, were already too heavy for the majority of bridges and would have to actually be floated across some of the rivers if they were ever going to actually get across them. The P1000, how's that going to work? How's a bridge going to hold this? Is there a bridge big enough? If there isn't a bridge, how are you going to get it across water? Just think about how many just ridiculous things you would have to accommodate for when you look at a design like this. In essence, the P-1000 was to have a large rolling plate battle platform armed to the teeth. The massive turrets would have been positioned well forward in the hull, with primary armament envisioned as two 280mm 54.5 SKC-34 guns fitted in side-by-side mounts. These based on powerful naval warship guns, necessitating the need for a custom design to house the twin artillery armor arrangement. So obviously these two guns would have been the largest ever put on a tank. Remember, once again, the Jagdtiger, the Maus 128mm guns, the Sturm Mehl 128mm. I believe these were the largest guns that were mounted, at least on a production variant of a German vehicle. Now times that by 2 and add a little bit more, and that is what you get in the P-1000. My god, what a crackpot idea. Nearly as bad as the was it the KV-6 or whatever that land battleship that the Soviets, basically the one that was made up in the 90s because somebody decided to screw with the model. I've done a video on it, should be able to have a look. I believe it's called the KV-6, I might be wrong about that though. Essentially, the turret would be a modified heavy cruiser gun emplacement, possibly from the Gneisenau class, with full 360-degree traverse, albeit slow to move such a heavy fixture. As such, firing on the move would not have been possible. Secondary armaments became a 128mm KWK-44 L55 anti-tank gun, as well as 8 20mm Flak 38 anti-tank cannon systems, the latter to combat incoming low-flying enemy aircraft, as the P-1000 would have made a tempting, slow-moving target for many and airmen. You know, one of the biggest issues in World War II for a lot of, let's call them attack aircraft, so stuff like the Typhoon, stuff like the later versions of the Hurricanes, they had a really low, let's call it, efficiency rate. Hitting targets and actually hurting targets was a endeavour which was sought after by the British, but never was really fully realized in a big way. You know, the percentage actual success of most rockets from these planes was very, very bad. You know, you're talking about single-digit numbers here. Now, if you compare that to hitting this thing, I think we would have had much better statistics if the Germans decided to make these big rolling bunkers. I'm sure most pilots would have been able to hit them. The 128mm gun system would have either been mounted in the main turret with the twin naval guns or seated in an individual, albeit smaller, fitted turret fitted to the rear of the hull. So as you can see on this design that we have in game, the 120mm, or at least where the 120mm is supposed to be, is at the bottom of the P-1000. There was also a further fitting of two 50mm MG-151 autocannons. This would have also been part of the armament package for the P-1000, making for one impressive battlefield combat system. I mean, if you look at the amount of guns on it, yeah, sounds great. You know what the issue is? Everything else. A minimum estimated crew of 20 people, or personnel, though as many as 40, would have been required to man the various onboard systems, a throwback to the large boxy German tank design of World War I, the A7V Sturmpanzer Kraftwagen, which used 18 crew and fielded a 57mm gun and up to 5 7.9mm machine guns. Oh, how times have changed. In around about 20-25 years, we've gone from one 57mm main gun to hoping for two 280s on top of 128, on top of a bunch of 20s, on top of a bunch of 15s. Who was smoking what, and can I get some? To propel such a behemoth across the battlefield of Europe, Krupp suggested... I love it how they were actually taking this seriously. Krupp suggested the use of either 8 Daimler-Benz MB501 20-cylinder marine diesel engines developing an estimated 16,000 horsepower or 4-man V127 Z32/ 4.4 24-cylinder marine diesel engines of 17,000 horsepower output. 16,000 or 17,000 horsepower. Another thing that kind of goes against the Rat, and one of the big reasons why, well, probably not a big reason why it wasn't developed. I mean, the big reason is because it was kind of insane. If you look at any things in history, there hasn't really been anything that's properly built like this, unless you look to the sea. But anyway, let's talk about the issues that Germany had with supply. The supply for raw materials wasn't exactly great. By 1943, they were even struggling for specific resources and materials. Oil was a big thing in the North African campaign, and this is why it was so important in Operation Barbarossa to capture the oil fields. Now, by 1943, that is obviously after a lot of this fighting, and this pretty much meant that a design like the P1000, even thinking about it in 1942, would have even just been a pipe dream just by looking at the resources that the Germans had. They would have to commit way too much just to create one of these in order for it to get bombed after maybe, well, let's say a week or so, depending on how when the Allies actually see it. The former engine type was utilized in existing German E-boat systems, while the latter was prominent in U-boat submarine design, so they were really sticking to the land ship idea. The optimistic top speed was 25 miles per hour. I would definitely agree, that's quite optimistic. This was suspect with all things considered. Sure it was, just like all of... I mean, after reading about the Bf-109 Zwilling and what they proposed was going to be its top speed and what they believed was going to happen, I do not believe any of these estimates that ever come out of the German engineers in World War II. All I can find is the majority of them just massively oversold their ideas, I think is the best way to put it. The durable operational range was also a concern. The idea of 120 miles was entertained. Yeah, entertained at a bloody clown party. It is assumed that the P1000 would have been extremely limited in most facets of its general operation. Speed, range, and reliability. Oh, I wonder why. Big machine, big moving parts, always going to have more and more issues. Everything is under a little bit more stress. Everything is under... the fact that basically when you scale up a machine, the issues you've got to run into pretty much, twice and three times become problems. That's why, as a society, we're trying to make everything smaller. Maybe not just for the stress issue, but also for an efficiency issue, and also for a space issue. But for a machine like a P1000, one of the biggest issues you'll have is the stress on stuff like the engine, on the tracks, on the turret itself, all of these things, and they have to be even thought about. And I hope they did entertain these while designing this. This obviously... the problems with speed, range, and reliability meant that doubt started creeping in. This is the point where doubt started creeping in. As it stood, the Landkreuzer P1000 proved just another crazy idea from Adolf Hitler and just a waste of time. And one thing that Adolf Hitler at that time did not have when it came to wartime resources and engineering manpower was enough of it, and so committing it to such a pipe dream was a pretty insane idea. On paper, the P1000 was a true threat with enough firepower and inherent armor protection to both destroy anything on the modern battlefield and survive most anything thrown in its direction, but in reality, the system would have not added much in the way of changing the downward spiral of the German fortunes by the late war months, and I think it's pretty obvious why. If you have a huge machine, one of the problems with a battlefield which is always changing is moving said huge machine. As I said, they were already struggling with stuff like the Maus, the Jagdtiger in the later stages of the war. They would have struggled, if the war lasted longer with stuff, more stuff like the Maus and the the E100. Other nations struggled with their large vehicles. We looked at the TOG-2 the other day, and why that didn't really make a lot of sense. On top of this, we have stuff like the Tortoise, the reason why that was never put into service. Also the Black Prince, the usefulness of the Churchills in general, war, but the issues that they had as well. And if you even look at modern day tanks, there is a reason why we didn't just keep making stuff bigger. It actually become much more beneficial to be smaller, because your silhouette is smaller, it is harder to see you, so you can get the jump on the enemy. And the majority of battles in World War II and beyond have been won by the people who were spotted, the people who fired first, who basically were able to spot the enemy first. So to create such a monstrosity makes absolutely no sense. But then again, it is one of those weird and wonderful ideas that brought us, that came from World War II. Hopefully, one day, we could get maybe a custom mission, where you have to kill the rats, or it could be some kind of April Fool's idea. Everybody's running around in 60 kilometer an hour, rats just running around the battlefield against maybe battleships which are on little wheels on the land. Also, the P1000 project did actually have, something come out of it. Eventually it did found the mouse idea, the Panzerkampfwagen 8 mouse, and that actually went on to become the largest tank to be built in World War II. So at least there was something. At least there was something there that the rats can say it contributed to. Overall, though, what an absolute waste of space. It is lovely to see the model actually in War Thunder, though, and hopefully one day we see it come in some form of weird and wonderful way. Will it ever make it so it's a researchable vehicle or a gift vehicle? Hell nah! Keep this out. But if we want to have some fun with it and put it into some interesting missions, or maybe as an Easter egg on one of the maps, I think that is its true place in the game. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.